Commander Zexthai looked out at the stars from his ship's bridge. The dark void of space stretched in all directions, filled with tiny points of light that marked distant suns and planets. His ship, the Silver Dawn, moved slowly through what used to be human space 300 years ago. The Altarian Defense Fleet had been patrolling these empty regions for decades now. It was quiet work, mostly boring. Sometimes they found old human buildings on dead planets. Sometimes they had to chase away pirates who thought the empty worlds were good hiding spots. But nothing exciting ever happened here anymore. Zexthai was tall and thin, like all Altarians. His skin was pale blue, and his large eyes could see much better than human eyes ever could. He had been born long after the humans disappeared, but he had read about them in school. The history book said humans were violent and unpredictable. They fought wars over small things and never seemed to get along with anyone for very long. "Sir, we're approaching the old human colony of New Perth," said his second officer, Kira. She was young and eager, always excited about everything they found. "Should we stop and check the ruins?" Zexthai nodded. "Yes, let's take a look. It's been 6 months since anyone visited this system. New Perth had once been home to 50,000 humans. Now it was just empty buildings and broken machines. The humans had left in a hurry when their government decided to abandon this part of space. Nobody knew exactly why they left, but most people thought they had finally decided to find somewhere far away, where they could fight among themselves without bothering anyone else. The Silver Dawn landed near the old spaceport. Zexthai and a small team put on their environment suits and walked through the empty streets. The buildings were simple and strong, built to last. Human engineering was crude but effective. They used basic fusion reactors and simple metal construction. Nothing fancy, but it worked. "Look at these weapons," Kira said, pointing to an old defense turret. "They just shoot pieces of metal really fast. So primitive." Zexthai examined the kinetic cannon. It was simple compared to the energy weapons his own people used, but he had to admit it would be very effective. A chunk of metal moving at high speed could punch through most armor. Humans might have been primitive, but they understood how to fight. They spent several hours exploring the colony. Everything valuable had been taken long ago, but the basic structure remained. Houses, schools, factories, all empty now. Other species had tried to settle some of the old human worlds, but most were too harsh. Humans seemed to like planets that other species found uncomfortable. As they prepared to leave, Kira pointed to something in the distance. "Sir, what's that?" Zexthai looked where she was pointing. Far off, near the edge of the colony, stood a tall metal monument. They walked over to investigate. It was a simple pillar with words carved into it in several languages, including Galactic Standard. "Here lie the dreams of New Perth," Zexthai read aloud. "We go to find new stars, but we will never forget this world that gave us strength. Humanity endures." "Typical human sentiment," Kira said. "Always so dramatic about everything." But Zexthai felt something strange as he read those words. There was something about the way humans wrote and spoke that suggested they believed deeply in things. Other species were more practical, more logical. Humans seemed to have strong feelings about everything. They returned to the ship and continued their patrol. The next few days were routine. They checked 3 more empty systems and filed their reports. Everything was normal and quiet, just as it had been for 300 years. On the 4th day, everything changed. Lieutenant Vox was monitoring the long-range sensors when he suddenly sat up straight. "Commander, I'm reading something strange." Zexthai walked over to look at the sensor display. At the very edge of their detection range, something was moving toward them. The energy signature was massive, bigger than anything in their database. "What kind of ship gives off readings like that?" Zexthai asked. Vox shook his head. "I don't know, sir. The computer can't identify it. The energy output is, well, it's enormous. Much larger than our biggest dreadnoughts." Zexthai felt his stomach tighten. First contact with unknown species was always dangerous. "How many ships?" "That's the strange part, sir. I'm reading what looks like hundreds of individual signals, but they're all moving together in perfect formation. And they're moving fast, much faster than should be possible." The bridge fell silent as everyone stared at the sensor readings. Ships that size shouldn't be able to move at those speeds. It violated several known laws of physics. Either their sensors were wrong, or they were dealing with technology far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Send a message to Fleet Command," Zexthai ordered. "Tell them we have possible first contact with unknown aliens. Request backup and instructions. Already sent, sir. They're asking for more details. Sir? Vox called out, his voice tense. The unknown ships just changed course. They're heading directly for us. Sexthai's mouth went dry. How long until they reach us? At their current speed, 6 hours. 6 hours to prepare for contact with something completely unknown. Sexthai had trained for this situation, but he had never expected it to actually happen. Most new species were discovered through careful long-range observation and planned diplomatic contact. This felt different. This felt dangerous. Bring us to yellow alert, he ordered. Charge weapons, but keep them powered down. Ready the communication system for first contact protocols. The next 6 hours passed slowly. The unknown ships continued to approach at impossible speed. Long-range scanners revealed more details that made no sense. The ships were huge, far larger than anything the Galactic Confederation had ever built. They seemed to be made of some kind of metal that absorbed sensor beams, making detailed scans difficult. 1 hour until contact, Vox reported. Any response to our communications? Sexthai asked. Nothing, sir. They're not answering any of our signals. Sexthai stared at the main display screen. Soon they would know what kind of species they were dealing with. He hoped they were friendly. Ships that large could cause a lot of damage if they wanted to. Sir, they're dropping out of faster-than-light travel, Vox announced. The main screen flickered and then showed something that made everyone on the bridge gasp. A ship materialized in space before them, so large it filled the entire display. It was dark gray and covered in scars from what looked like countless battles. Strange energy patterns danced along its hull. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the eyes of some enormous predator. My God, Kira whispered. How big is that thing? Computer estimates 12 kilometers long, Vox replied in a shaky voice. Sexthai had never seen anything like it. The ship radiated power and danger. Whatever species had built it clearly understood war very well. As he watched, more ships appeared around the first one, each one massive and threatening. Then something impossible happened. A communication signal reached their ship, broadcast in perfect galactic standard with no accent or translation errors. Altarian vessel, this is Admiral Sarah Chen Okafor of the United Earth Systems Fleet. We are returning to reclaim what was once ours. Stand aside. Sexthai's blood went cold. He knew that name from the history books. Chen Okafor was a human name, but humans had been gone for 300 years. These couldn't be the same primitive people who had left in crude colony ships. As he watched the massive fleet of impossibly advanced warships hanging in space before him, Sexthai realized that humanity had returned, and they were nothing like the species that had left so long ago. Admiral Sarah Chen Okafor stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus Rising and watched the small Altarian ship through the main viewing screen. The alien vessel looked fragile compared to her massive dreadnought. Its weapons were powered down, and she could see the confusion and fear in the energy patterns coming from their communication systems. She was not the same woman who had left Earth's solar system 300 years ago. That woman had died in the fires of Andromeda, along with most of her original crew and billions of other humans. What stood here now was something new, something forged in battles that no species in this galaxy could imagine. Admiral, said Captain Morrison, her tactical officer. Like all the crew, he looked human, but carried himself with a precision and awareness that spoke of deep changes. The Altarian ship is requesting permission to withdraw and report to their superiors. Sarah nodded. Granted. We have no quarrel with them today. She turned to face the bridge crew. Begin the approach to New Perth. It's time to see what they've done with our home. The Prometheus Rising moved forward, followed by nearly 2,000 other ships. Each vessel in the fleet carried scars from the Long War, as they had come to call their 3-century struggle in distant galaxies. The hulls were made from materials that didn't exist in this galaxy's databases, forged from the remnants of destroyed enemy vessels, and improved through hard-won experience. Sarah remembered the day they had first encountered the Devourers in the Andromeda galaxy. Humanity's colony ships had been searching for new worlds to settle, when they found something that should not have existed. Ancient machines older than most civilizations, that consumed entire planets and used the material to build more of themselves. The Devourers had been spreading across Andromeda for millions of years, leaving dead systems in their wake. The first contact had been a disaster. 12 human colony ships destroyed in minutes by weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. The survivors had learned quickly that they were facing an enemy that adapted to every tactic, learned from every battle, and never showed mercy. "Admiral," Morrison said quietly, "long-range sensors show several Confederation fleets moving to intercept us. Should we prepare for combat?" Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. They're just scared and trying to show strength. Let them come close enough to see what we've become. Sometimes the best weapon is the enemy's own imagination." She looked around the bridge at her crew. They had all been changed by the long war. Human genetics had been pushed beyond normal limits by necessity, and alien technology they had captured and learned to use. Their reaction times were faster than any natural human. Their minds could process information at rates that bordered on artificial intelligence. They could survive in environments that would kill their ancestors. But the biggest change was not physical. It was mental. These humans had learned to think as one when necessary, while keeping their individual creativity. They had learned to plan battles across decades and fight wars across galaxies. They had learned that survival sometimes required choices that peaceful species couldn't understand. Approaching New Perth, the navigation officer reported. Sarah looked at the planet where she had been born. It looked the same from space, but she knew everything had changed. The colony had been abandoned when humanity made the hard choice to leave this galaxy behind and seek their fortune elsewhere. Now other species had built new cities where human children had once played. Sir, detecting Kepler Merchant Guild facilities on the surface. Population approximately 80,000, mostly Keplers with some Drexani workers. They've converted the old human mining facilities for their own use. Sarah felt no anger about this. The galaxy had to keep working while humanity was away. But now humanity was back and changes would have to be made. "Send them a message," she ordered. "Standard evacuation notice. They have 72 standard hours to pack their belongings and leave. Transportation will be provided to any Confederation world they choose." "Admiral," Morrison said carefully, "they're asking why they have to leave. They say they have legal claims to the planet under Confederation law." Sarah almost smiled. "Legal claims. How very civilized of them. Tell them that Confederation law doesn't apply to human worlds. This planet belonged to humanity before the Confederation existed, and it belongs to humanity now. They can leave peacefully, or they can wait and see what happens when our engineers start terraforming the planet back to human standards." The threat was not empty. Human terraforming technology had advanced dramatically during the Long War. They could change a planet's entire ecosystem in weeks if necessary. It was often easier than trying to adapt to alien-modified worlds. "Sir, the Keplers are asking to negotiate. They want to discuss compensation and timeline." "There will be no negotiation," Sarah said firmly. 72 hours. After that we begin reclamation whether they're still there or not." She knew this sounded harsh, but humanity had learned hard lessons about compromise. The Devourers had never negotiated. They had never shown mercy or accepted surrender. Any species that wanted to survive in a dangerous universe had to be willing to make difficult choices. As reports came in from other human fleets reclaiming other worlds, Sarah reviewed the intelligence data they had gathered about the current state of the galaxy. The Galactic Confederation had grown larger and more organized since humanity left. Most species seemed to live in relative peace, settling disputes through diplomacy and trade rather than warfare. It was admirable in many ways, but it also made them soft. They had forgotten that the universe was full of dangers that couldn't be reasoned with or bought off. Humanity had learned this lesson in blood and fire, and they would not forget it again. "Admiral, we're receiving communications from the Confederation Council. They want to arrange a formal first contact meeting." Sarah considered this. "Tell them we'll meet with their representatives, but the location will be of our choosing, and our terms are not subject to negotiation. Humanity is reclaiming our ancestral territories. The Confederation can accept this reality or discover what happened to the last species that tried to stop us." The bridge fell silent at these words. Everyone knew she was referring to the Devourers. After 3 centuries of war, humanity had finally won. Not through superior technology alone, but through superior adaptability and an absolute refusal to give up. The Devourers had been completely destroyed, their technology absorbed and improved by human engineers, their tactics studied and countered by human strategists. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're getting news feeds from across the galaxy. Word of our return is spreading. Some species are calling for military action. Others are suggesting immediate diplomatic contact. The markets are, well, they're crashing, Sarah nodded. That's expected. Change is always frightening, but they'll adapt. Species that can't adapt don't survive long. She looked out at the stars that had once been humanity's home. 300 years ago, humans had been just another struggling species trying to find their place in the galaxy. They had been considered primitive and aggressive by the more established civilizations. Now they had returned as something far beyond what any of those civilizations could have imagined. They had technologies that seemed like magic, tactics that appeared to predict the future, and a unity of purpose that came from knowing they were the only thing standing between civilization and the darkness that lay beyond the galactic rim. Begin Phase 2 of the reclamation, Sarah ordered. Signal all fleet commanders. It's time to show this galaxy what humanity has become. President Veltar of the Galactic Confederation stood in the Great Council chamber on Harmony Station, looking at the holographic displays that showed human fleets moving through space like a slow but unstoppable tide. In just 3 weeks, humanity had reclaimed 17 star systems without firing a single shot in anger. They simply arrived, politely asked the current residents to leave, and waited. The waiting was the most terrifying part. What's the latest report from the Drexani border? Veltar asked his aide, a nervous young Altarian named Kex. The humans have established a defensive perimeter 50 light-years beyond their original territories, Kex replied, consulting his datapad. They're not crossing it, but they're making it very clear that anyone else who does will regret it. Veltar sighed. The Drexani were warrior-born, bred for battle across thousands of generations. Their bioships were living weapons that could adapt to almost any threat. If anyone in the galaxy could stand up to these returning humans, it would be them. But Veltar was not eager to start a war over empty principles. And the evacuations from human worlds? He asked. Proceeding without incident, Kex reported. The humans are providing transportation and even helping people pack their belongings. No violence, no theft. They're being very polite. That was what made it so frightening. The humans weren't acting like conquerors. They were acting like people moving back into a house they had temporarily lent to friends. There was no anger, no hatred, just a calm certainty that this was how things were going to be. Sir, another aide called out. We have an incoming message from Admiral Chen Okafor. She's requesting a meeting. Where? Veltar asked. She suggests the abandoned trade station at Kepler Junction. Neutral territory. Veltar thought about this. Kepler Junction had been a busy trading hub before the humans left. Now it was just an empty station orbiting a dead star. It seemed appropriate somehow. Tell her I'll meet with her in 3 days, he decided. Small delegations only. No weapons. 3 days later, Veltar found himself on a shuttle approaching the old station. His security team had wanted to bring a full escort, but the humans had made it clear that any large military presence would be considered hostile. They seemed very confident in their ability to handle any problems that might arise. The station's docking bay was dark and cold. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls. Veltar and his small group of advisors walked through empty corridors toward the old conference center. The sound of their footsteps echoed strangely in the thin air. Admiral Chen Okafor was waiting for them, in what had once been the main meeting hall. She stood alone, no guards or advisors visible, though Veltar suspected there were human soldiers nearby. She was tall and appeared to be middle-aged, though something about her eyes suggested she had seen far more than any normal person should. President Veltar, she said, extending her hand in the old human greeting. Thank you for coming. Veltar took her hand carefully. Her grip was firm but not threatening. Admiral, I must say your return has caused quite a stir in the galaxy. Chen Okafor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I imagine it has. Please sit. We have much to discuss. They sat at a simple table that had probably hosted thousands of trade negotiations over the years. Now it was the setting for what might be the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Let me be direct, Chen Okafor said. Humanity has returned to reclaim our ancestral territories. We have no desire for conquest beyond our historical borders. But we will not negotiate on the fundamental point. These worlds are ours. The Confederation recognizes historical claims, Veltar said carefully, but many of these worlds have been settled for over 2 centuries. People have built lives there. Children have been born there. Surely some accommodation can be reached. We are providing free transportation to any Confederation world the residents choose, Chen Okafor replied. We are even offering compensation for improvements they made to our property. We are being more generous than we need to be. And if we refuse? Veltar asked. Chen Okafor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried a weight that made Veltar's skin crawl. President Veltar, have you ever heard of the Devourers? Veltar shook his head. They were ancient machines that consumed entire civilizations. We encountered them in the Andromeda Galaxy 300 years ago. They destroyed 12 of our colony ships in our first contact. After that, it was war. She paused and seemed to be looking at something far away. The Devourers adapted to everything we tried. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy. They learned from each battle and became stronger. For 3 centuries, we fought them across multiple galaxies. We lost billions of people. We were forced to become something harder, smarter, more ruthless than we had ever been before. What happened to them? Veltar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We destroyed every single one, not just their ships or their factories. We hunted down every last trace of their existence and erased it from the universe. Her eyes focused on Veltar again. We learned that some enemies cannot be negotiated with. Some threats must be eliminated completely. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Are you threatening us? Veltar asked. I'm explaining reality, Chen Okafor replied calmly. Humanity will never again allow ourselves to be in a position where another species can threaten our existence. We are not your enemies, President Veltar, but we are no longer your equals. You can work with us or you can discover what happened to the Devourers. Before Veltar could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the room in red. His aide quickly checked his communicator. Sir, it's the Drexani. They've sent a battle fleet to intercept the human ships near the border. 300 bioships. Chen Okafor stood slowly and touched a small device on her wrist. Admiral Chen Okafor to Fleet Command. I'm aware of the Drexani fleet movement. Send the 42nd Squadron to respond. Rules of engagement are defensive only unless fired upon. Admiral, came the response from her communicator. The 42nd has only 50 ships. That should be sufficient, Chen Okafor replied calmly. Veltar stared at her in shock. 50 ships against 300? Admiral, the Drexani bioships are the most advanced military vessels in the galaxy. They adapt to weapons fire and can regenerate damage. You're sending your people to die. Chen Okafor looked at him with something that might have been pity. President Veltar, in the 3 centuries we spent fighting the Devourers, we learned something important. It's not the size of your fleet that matters. It's not even the power of your weapons. What matters is knowing your enemy better than they know themselves. She touched her communicator again. Fleet Command, patch me through to the battle frequency. The room filled with the sound of communications chatter as the human and Drexani fleets approached each other. Veltar listened in growing amazement as he heard the calm, professional voices of human officers discussing tactics and target priorities. They sounded like people preparing for a routine training exercise, not a battle against overwhelming odds. All ships, this is Admiral Reeves commanding the 42nd, came a voice over the comm. Remember, we're not here to start a war. We're here to end a misunderstanding. Engage defensive formations. Fire only if fired upon. Veltar could see the tactical display on his aide's datapad. The 50 human ships had arranged themselves in a loose formation that seemed almost casual compared to the tight battle formation of the approaching Drexani fleet. Human vessels, came a harsh voice that Veltar recognized as Drexani warspeak. You are in violation of Confederation space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Drexani fleet, Admiral Reeves responded politely. You are approaching human territory. Please alter course to avoid any misunderstanding. This is not human territory. This is neutral space. Not anymore, Reeves said simply. The Drexani opened fire. What happened next would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When it was over, every single Drexani bioship was floating dead in space. Their bio-neural network somehow completely shut down. Not one human vessel had taken so much as a scratch. Chen Okafor turned off the communicator and looked at Veltar's shocked face. The Drexani crews are alive but unconscious, she said. They'll wake up in a few hours with headaches and wounded pride. We'll tow their ships back to the border and release them with a message for their government. How? Veltar whispered. How did you do that? We learned to fight enemies that adapted to conventional weapons, Chen Okafor explained. So we developed unconventional ones. Weapons that exist in quantum states. Weapons that attack the fundamental forces that hold matter together. Weapons that can rewrite the basic programming of biological neural networks. She sat back down and folded her hands. President Veltar, humanity has no desire to rule the galaxy. We simply want to make sure that nothing can ever threaten our existence again. Give us our buffer zone, acknowledge our sovereignty, and we can coexist peacefully. Force us to prove our capabilities again, and the next demonstration might not be so gentle. Veltar looked at his advisors. They were all staring at him with the same expression of shock and fear. The greatest military force in the galaxy had just been casually swatted aside like insects. What chance did any of them have against these returned humans? What are your terms? He asked quietly. Chen Okafor smiled, and this time it seemed genuine. I thought you'd never ask. The news of the Drexani fleet's defeat spread across the galaxy faster than the fastest starships. 300 of the most advanced military vessels in known space, disabled in minutes by a force 1/6 their size. Military experts studied the battle recordings over and over, trying to understand what they had witnessed. General Thokmar, the Drexani Supreme War Leader, stood in his command chamber staring at the tactical displays. His bioengineers and weapon specialists surrounded him, all looking confused and frightened. The bioships that had been their pride for thousands of years had simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged, just turned off like someone had found a switch. Explain this to me again, he growled at his chief scientist. Dr. Velnash, Supreme Leader, our ship's neural networks were somehow disconnected from their bodies. It's as if something reached into their brains and put them to sleep. But there's no weapon in our databases that can do this. The humans must have found a way to interfere with bioneural patterns, suggested another scientist. Perhaps some kind of electromagnetic pulse designed specifically for living tissue. Thokmar shook his massive head. If they can turn off our ships, what else can they turn off? Our soldiers? Our civilians? Our entire species? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. If humans could disable Drexani biology at will, then the warrior race that had dominated military thinking for centuries was suddenly as helpless as children. Meanwhile, on the Confederation capital world of Harmony Prime, President Veltar sat in an emergency session with representatives from 47 different species. The Great Council chamber buzzed with worried conversations in dozens of languages. We need to understand what we're dealing with, insisted Ambassador Clix of the Ethereal Collective, her energy form flickering with anxiety. These humans claim to have fought a war for 3 centuries. Against what? Where? Why haven't we heard of this before? Perhaps because they're lying, suggested Trade Minister Gorth from the Kepler Merchant Guild. No species could fight a war for 300 years and survive. It's impossible. Tell that to the Drexani, Veltar replied grimly. Their fleet is currently being towed home by human ships. The crews are alive but traumatized. They keep talking about weapons that don't make sense and tactics that seem to predict their every move. He activated the main display screen, showing a star chart of the galaxy with human-controlled territory marked in red. The area was much larger than it had been 3 weeks ago, and it was growing. They're not conquering through violence, he continued. They simply arrive at a system, politely inform the current residents that they need to leave, and wait. So far, everyone has left, voluntarily rather than find out what happens. To those who refuse, we should call their bluff, declared General Vex from the Altarian Defense Force. Send a joint fleet from all our species. They can't have enough ships to fight the entire galaxy. Can't they? Veltar asked. Admiral Chen Okafor mentioned fighting something called the Devourers for 3 centuries. She said they destroyed 12 human colony ships in first contact, which suggests the humans were outnumbered from the beginning. If they won a 3-century war against superior numbers, what makes you think our combined fleets would fare any better? The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If humanity had been fighting an advanced enemy for 300 years, and had not only survived but won, what had that struggle turned them into? Sir, an aide whispered to Veltar, we're receiving a communication from the human fleet. Admiral Chen Okafor is requesting another meeting. Where this time? She's suggesting the old human embassy on Harmony Prime. She says it would be symbolic. Veltar almost laughed despite his fear. The old human embassy had been converted into a museum decades ago, displaying artifacts from humanity's brief time as a minor galactic power. The irony was not lost on him. 2 days later, Veltar found himself walking through the museum that had once been humanity's diplomatic headquarters. The display showed primitive human technology, examples of their crude but effective engineering, and recordings of their simple but passionate speeches about human dignity and freedom. Admiral Chen Okafor was waiting for him in what had been the ambassador's office. She stood looking at a display case containing an old human flag, the simple design looking somehow prophetic now. "President Veltar," she said without turning around. "Do you know what this flag represents?" Veltar looked at the red, white, and blue cloth. "One of your old nation-states, I believe. Before you achieved planetary unity." "The United States of America," Chen Okafor confirmed. "A republic founded on the idea that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Simple words, but they changed the world. She turned to face him, and Veltar was struck again by the ancient sadness in her eyes. "We took those ideals with us when we left this galaxy. They sustained us through 3 centuries of war against an enemy that saw consciousness itself as a disease to be cured. The Devourers didn't just want to kill us. They wanted to erase the very concept of individual thought from the universe." "Why are you telling me this?" Veltar asked. "Because you need to understand what you're dealing with," she replied. "The humans who return are not the same species that left. We've been changed by 3 centuries of total war. We've had to become harder, smarter, more ruthless, but we've never forgotten what we're fighting for." She gestured to another display case containing recordings of human art, music, and literature. "Every battle we fought, every sacrifice we made, was to preserve the right of conscious beings to exist as individuals, to think their own thoughts, feel their own feelings, make their own choices. The Devourers would have turned the entire universe into a single, sterile intelligence. We stopped them. At what cost?" Veltar asked. Chen Okafor was quiet for a long moment. "Everything. We lost our original colonies, our original culture, most of our original population. The humans who returned are the children and grandchildren of survivors, raised in warships and battle stations, trained from birth to fight an enemy that adapted to everything we tried." She walked over to the old ambassador's desk and sat down. "We developed technology that seems like magic to you. Weapons that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, computers that can process quantum probabilities in real time, genetic modifications that let us think faster and react quicker than any natural human. But the most important thing we developed was unity. I don't understand. Individual humans can be reasoned with, bargained with, threatened, or bribed," Chen Okafor explained. "But when humanity as a whole decides something is necessary for our survival, nothing can stop us. We proved that against the Devourers. We're proving it again now." She activated a holographic projector that showed a map of local space. Human territory was clearly marked along with the proposed buffer zones. "These are our terms," she said simply. "Complete withdrawal from all former human worlds and acknowledgement of human sovereignty over a 50-light-year buffer zone around our territory. All current residents will be relocated at our expense to any Confederation world they choose. Trade agreements and diplomatic relations will be established once the territorial issues are settled." "And if we refuse?" Veltar asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you'll discover why the Devourers are extinct," Chen Okafor replied calmly. "You keep mentioning these Devourers," Veltar said, "but we've never heard of them. We have deep space sensors, archaeological surveys, historical records. There's no evidence of this massive war you claim to have fought." Chen Okafor smiled sadly. "That's because we were very thorough. Every Devourer construct, every piece of their technology, every trace of their existence was systematically destroyed. We couldn't risk leaving anything behind that might regenerate or be reverse-engineered by someone foolish enough to try." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy spaceport where ships from dozens of species came and went in peaceful trade. "We learned that some enemies can't be defeated. They can only be erased. The Devourers threatened the fundamental right of conscious beings to exist. So we removed them from existence entirely. Nothing remains of them but our memories and the scars they left on our souls." "Why should I believe any of this?" Veltar demanded. "How do I know you're not just making up stories to frighten us?" Chen Okafor turned back to him with an expression of infinite patience. "Because, President Veltar, If we were simply aggressive conquerors looking to dominate the galaxy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would have arrived with overwhelming force and simply taken what we wanted. Instead, we're offering you a choice. Accept our return peacefully, or force us to demonstrate why 3 centuries of total war made us into something the galaxy has never seen before. She walked over to another display case containing examples of human poetry and philosophy. We don't want to rule you, she said softly. We just want to make sure that no one can ever threaten human existence again. Give us our buffer zone, acknowledge our sovereignty, and we can coexist. Force us to fight for survival again, and we'll do whatever is necessary to win, just like we did with the Devourers. Veltar looked at this human who claimed to represent a species that had been gone for 3 centuries. She didn't look like a conqueror or a tyrant. She looked tired, sad, and absolutely certain of her cause. How long do we have to decide? He asked. The evacuations from our worlds will be complete in 6 days, Chen Okafor replied. After that, we begin terraforming them back to human standards whether anyone is still there or not. I suggest you make your decision before then. As Veltar left the old embassy, he realized that the galaxy was about to change forever. The question was whether it would change peacefully or violently. Looking at the determined expression on Admiral Chen Okafor's face, he suspected the choice was entirely up to the Confederation, and time was running out. 6 months had passed since humanity's return, and the galaxy had settled into an uneasy but stable new reality. The human sovereignty now controlled nearly 200 star systems, creating a buffer zone that stretched across a significant portion of known space. Trade flowed between human and Confederation territory, though always under careful human oversight. President Veltar stood in his office looking at reports from across the galaxy. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a grudging acceptance that humanity was back to stay. Some species had adapted better than others to the new balance of power. The latest economic reports, his aide Kex said, placing a data pad on his desk. Trade with human territories is actually boosting the galactic economy. Their advanced manufacturing techniques are producing goods we've never seen before. Veltar nodded absently. Human products were indeed impressive. Materials that seemed impossible, energy systems that worked on principles no one understood, medicines that could cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia. It was clear that humanity's 3-century absence had not been wasted. Any word from the Drexani? He asked. They've been very quiet since the battle, Kex replied. Intelligence suggests they're completely redesigning their military doctrine. The defeat has shaken them more than they're willing to admit publicly. That was understandable. For a warrior species to discover that their greatest weapons were useless against a potential enemy was deeply traumatic. Some Drexani had actually requested asylum in human space, claiming their own people no longer understood the true nature of warfare. Sir, another aide called out, we're receiving priority communications from our deep space monitoring stations. Something is approaching the galaxy from the direction of the Magellanic Clouds. Veltar felt his stomach drop. What kind of something? Unknown, sir. The energy signatures are massive, much larger than anything we've ever detected. The monitoring station at Outpost 7 estimates the approaching objects are at least 50 kilometers in diameter. Veltar closed his eyes. Just when the galaxy had adjusted to humanity's return, something new was coming. Something that might be even more dangerous. How long until they reach the galactic rim? At their current speed, approximately 6 months. Have we informed the humans? We sent the data to Admiral Chen Okafor as soon as we received it. Her response was interesting. Veltar looked up. What did she say? Kex consulted his notes. Quote, thank you for the information. Humanity will handle this. Please keep your ships away from the projected approach vector. End quote. That was typical of the humans. Calm, polite, and absolutely certain they could handle whatever was coming. Veltar had learned to trust that certainty, even when it frightened him. 3 weeks later, long-range sensors detected human fleet movements on a massive scale. Thousands of ships were deploying to the galactic rim, taking positions along the approach vector of the unknown objects. The formation was unlike anything in Confederation tactical doctrine, with ships spread across light years of space in patterns. That seemed almost random, Admiral. Sarah Chen Okafor stood on the bridge of the Prometheus Rising and watched the tactical displays, showing her fleet's deployment. Behind her, the familiar sounds of a warship preparing for battle filled the air. It had been 6 months since they had faced a real threat, and she could sense her crew's anticipation. "All fleet elements report ready, Admiral," Captain Morrison announced. "The perimeter is established and sensors are active." Sarah nodded. The approaching objects were clearly artificial, moving in formation and radiating energy signatures that suggested advanced technology. After 3 centuries of fighting the Devourers, she recognized the signs of a hostile force when she saw them. "Any response to our communication attempts?" she asked. "Nothing, sir. They're maintaining course and speed directly toward the inhabited sectors of the galaxy." Sarah wasn't surprised. Truly hostile species rarely bothered with communication. They either saw other life forms as threats to be eliminated or resources to be consumed. Either way, diplomacy was usually pointless. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, "the unknown objects are beginning to decelerate. They're taking positions at the galaxy's edge." The main screen showed long-range images of the approaching fleet. The ships were huge, dark, and covered with weapon systems that radiated menace even across the vast distances of space. They looked like they had been designed by a species that viewed warfare as the highest art form. "How many ships?" Sarah asked. "Computer estimates 800 vessels, ranging in size from 20 to over 100 kilometers. "Admiral, these things are enormous." Sarah studied the tactical display. 800 massive warships represented a threat that could devastate the entire galaxy, if left unchecked. But she had faced worse odds against the Devourers and survived. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships to combat readiness. Prepare for engagement." "Admiral," Morrison said quietly, "shouldn't we try to warn the Confederation, if this goes badly?" "If this goes badly, President Veltar won't have time to evacuate the galaxy," Sarah replied. "We handle this here and now or not at all." The human fleet moved forward to meet the unknown threat. As they approached, the alien ships finally responded to communication attempts, broadcasting a message in a harsh, guttural language that the translation computers struggled to process. "Translation coming through now, Admiral," the communications officer reported. "They identify themselves as the Harvest Fleet. The translation is unclear, but they seem to be demanding our surrender and offering to make our deaths quick if we comply." Sarah almost smiled. It was always the same with hostile species. They assumed that superior numbers and bigger ships automatically meant victory. They never considered that experience might matter more than raw firepower. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Harvest Fleet, this is Admiral Saracen Okafor of the United Earth Systems Navy. You are approaching inhabited space without permission. Turn around and leave, or face the consequences." The alien response was immediate and predictable. Energy weapons began charging across their fleet, and the massive ship started moving into attack formation. Sarah had seen it all before. "All ships," she broadcast to her fleet, "weapons free. Show them what 3 centuries of warfare taught us." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Harvest Fleet attacked with weapons that bent space itself, creating gravity wells that should have crushed the human ships instantly. Their vessels fired energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making conventional shields useless. Against any other species, it would have been a massacre. Against humanity, it was barely an inconvenience. Human ships phased in and out of normal spacetime, avoiding attacks that couldn't hit targets existing in quantum superposition. Human weapons ignored the aliens' advanced armor by attacking the fundamental forces that held matter together. Human tactics seemed to anticipate every move the Harvest Fleet made, countering strategies before they were even fully implemented. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Harvest Fleet was nothing but expanding clouds of debris and radiation. Not a single human ship had been destroyed, though several showed minor damage from near misses. "Admiral," Morrison reported, his voice filled with satisfaction, "enemy fleet completely destroyed. All human vessels reporting minimal damage only." Sarah looked at the debris field that had once been 800 massive warships, another threat eliminated, another potential extinction event prevented. It was what humanity did now. It was what they had learned to do in 3 centuries of total war. "Send a message to President Veltar," she ordered. "Tell him the threat has been neutralized and normal space traffic can resume." "What should we do with the wreckage, Admiral?" Sarah considered this. The alien technology might be useful, but it also might be dangerous. Better to be safe. "Standard procedure," she decided. Complete sterilization of all alien technology. We don't leave anything behind that might be reverse-engineered or regenerate later. As the human fleet began the systematic destruction of every trace of the Harvest fleet, Sarah reflected on how the galaxy had changed since humanity's return. 6 months ago, most species had seen humans as returning primitives who needed to be managed and contained. Now they understood that humanity had become something far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The various species that made up the Confederation were already adjusting to this new reality. Some, like the Kepler Merchant Guild, had embraced the opportunities that trade with humanity provided. Others, like the Ethereal Collective, had withdrawn into their home systems to contemplate the philosophical implications of humanity's transformation. The Drexani had perhaps changed the most. Once confident warriors, they were now studying human military doctrine with the intensity of students learning from masters. Several Drexani officers had requested positions on human ships, hoping to understand how their traditional approaches to warfare had become obsolete overnight. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. News of the battle is spreading." "Most species are." "Well, they're thanking us," Sarah nodded. That was good. It meant the galaxy was beginning to understand humanity's true role in the current order. They were not conquerors or oppressors. They were guardians, standing watch against the dangers that lurked in the dark spaces between galaxies. "Set course for home," she ordered, "and send a message to all fleet commanders. Well done today. Another threat eliminated, another day of peace secured for the galaxy." As the human fleet began its journey back to their territory, Sarah looked out at the stars that had once been humanity's birthplace. 300 years ago, her ancestors had been forced to flee this galaxy in search of safety and a new home. They had found neither safety nor home, but they had found something more valuable: the knowledge of what they could become when survival was the only option. Now they had returned, not as the primitive species that had fled centuries ago, but as the guardians the galaxy needed. They would stand watch against the darkness, fight the battles that others couldn't win, and ensure that conscious life could continue to exist in freedom. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was one that humanity had earned through 3 centuries of blood and sacrifice. The galaxy might stand helpless before them, but humanity stood as its protector against everything that lay beyond. The stars shone peacefully in the void, and behind them, human ships maintained their eternal watch.